Does good and better prove that there is a best God? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Channel summary of the Summa Theologica. Today we're looking at Part 1, Question 2, Article 3, whether God exists. This is the fourth video on this article, and we're looking at the fourth way of proving the statement God exists is true. This is the argument from Gradation. For this one, I thought maybe we should just go through the whole argument first and then look at the individual premises that we thought were interesting. So here it is. Premise 1, some beings are more and some less good, true, noble, and the like. 2, more and less are predicated of different things according as they resemble in their different ways something which is the maximum. And he gives the example as a thing is said to be hotter according as it more nearly resembles that which is hottest. 3, so there is something which is truest, something best, something noblest. 4, those things that are greatest in truth are greatest in being. This he gets from Aristotle's Metaphysics, Book 2. 5, so there is something which is uttermost being. 6, the maximum in any genus is the cause of all in that genus. As he says, as fire, which is the maximum heat, is the cause of all hot things. 7, so there must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection. 8, this we call God. Okay, so let's look at them each premise individually. The first premise was some beings are more and some less good, true, noble, and the like. So this one can seem odd because when we think of the word good, first of all, we think it's very judgy to say something is better, something is more good than another thing, right? And when we're doing that, we're thinking about a moral good, right? We're thinking like this thing is evil versus this thing is a good thing. That's not exactly what good means here. And then it sounds really bizarre to say something is true, more true than another thing, right? Shouldn't we say that propositions are more true than other propositions, but not say that like an object is more true than another object? And what do we mean by nobler than another thing? Well, when we're using these terms, we're talking about what are called transcendentals. And these are things that are said to be true of all things insofar as they exist, insofar as they have being. In fact, these things are said to be convertible with being. They're convertible with each other and convertible with being. What that means is wherever you find being, you find these things and in that proportion. So when we see something that has a lot of being, you see something that has a lot of good, a lot of truth. The word noble is kind of an odd one. We'll talk about in a second. There's also beauty, which he doesn't mention here, which is transcendental, and unity. So what is it to say a transcendental use of the word good? We're really talking about an ontological use of the word good instead of a moral use of the word good. And what we mean by that is goodness is being insofar as it is desirable, right? So if you be, you know, that's a desirable thing. It's desirable to be. So the more being you have, the more desirable that is. So the more good that thing is. Again, not a moral use of the word good. And a similar analysis would work with truth. Truth is being insofar as it is intelligible. So insofar as it is able to be understood. So if a thing has more being, it is more intelligible, right? There is more to understand. So it is more intelligible. So the more being a thing has, the more goodness it has, the more truth it has. Noble is a weird one, though, when it comes to transcendentals, because nobility is not one of the transcendentals. But what we could say here is nobility is really talking about the perfection of a thing. And the perfection of a thing meaning the completion of a thing, the completeness, maybe, instead. So the more complete a thing is, the more the being of its being that it has. So things can be more complete than not. And insofar as they're more complete, they have more being. Now comes the tricky one. Premise 2. More and less are predicated of different things according as they resemble in their different ways something which is the maximum. So this is a very bizarre one. And the example he gives just makes it worse. He says, as a thing is said to be hotter according as it more nearly resembles that which is hottest. This is just outmoded physics. So we should really just throw that example out. Instead, it's not even a helpful one, because really what he's worried about are the transcendentals. He's not worried about your standard type of property, right? Edward Feser has a great way of putting this. He says that if it were the case that we were just talking about just any property here instead of transcendentals, then we could say that because there are things that are more and less stinky, there would be some maximum stinkiness, right? Something that is a maximum stinkiness, and that just seems absurd. So that's not what we're talking about. That's not what Aquinas is interested in. So what justifies this principle? Well, some philosophers have seen this as a Platonic principle, which is to say that in order for a thing to be good or noble or true, they have to participate in the form of good, noble, and true. However, I'm not actually going to explain to you what this means because Thomas is not a Platonist, so this is not a good interpretation. Instead, there are two other possible interpretations, I think, that are viable. And the first one is the efficient cause interpretation. And that is to say that things that have these properties to a lesser or more degree must receive them from a distinct efficient cause. You know, if you aren't what it is to be goodness, if it's not part of your very essence to be good, then just by the principle of causality, why do you have it, right? There must be something that brings about that goodness in you. At the very end, I'll lay it out a little bit more logically, but where we're going with this is to say, then, you know, everything that has these to a lesser degree or a more degree requires this efficient cause, but you can't have an infinite regress of efficient causes. So there must be something that has these things, but doesn't have it to a lesser or more degree, something that has it to a maximum degree. So there's the efficient cause interpretation. The second decent interpretation is something that we get from his Lectura on St. John's Gospel. And there he has an argument that goes something like this. Everything that exists the way it does by participation is reduced to something that is that way essentially. So if if the reason that you are a particular way is because you participate in that way, then you are reduced to something that is that way in and of itself. All things participate in esse in Latin, or we can use the word being for right now. Therefore, there must be something which is essentially esse, is essentially being. Esse, by the way, like I haven't talked about this yet, but there's not a great translation of this word when we're talking about Aquinas' philosophy. We'll eventually get to this, but it is the act of being, the act of existing. And now using this structure, we can run this exact argument using the transcendentals. Let's save that for the very end, and let's look at the rest of the premises here. 3, again, so there is something which is truest, something best, something noblest. Again, we'll argue for that using these two ways of arguing at the very end. 4, those things that are greatest in truth are greatest in being. Again, he gets this from Aristotle's Metaphysics, Book 2, where Aristotle says, as each thing is in respect of being, so it is in respect of truth. In other words, like how much being it has, that's how much truth it has, and vice versa, right? The two things are convertible, as we say. 5, so there is something which is uttermost being. 6, the maximum in any genus is the cause of all that in the genus. And Aquinas' example here isn't going to make any sense because there is no real maximum of heat. This is only going to make sense for genuses that have a maximum, and those would be our transcendentals. So again, this is a premise that will make sense only for the transcendentals that we're going to be talking about. So there must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection, and this we call God. So let's look at the efficient cause interpretation of this argument. So this is one possible interpretation of the way this argument should go. 1. Everything that has goodness, truth, and nobility to a limited degree must receive those things from a distinct efficient cause. And again, this is from the principle of causality. You have it to a limited degree. That means that you are not those things. That means we are asking the question, how did those things come to be in you? 2, there can't be an infinite regress of distinct efficient causes. Now, this is something that I won't argue for, that you can look back in arguments 1 and 2, and that they cover the reason why we can't have an infinite regress. 3, so there must be an efficient cause of the goodness, truth, and nobility of all things that itself has goodness, truth, and nobility to an unlimited degree, right? This thing must not, in order to avoid having this infinite chain, it must not itself have goodness, truth, nobility to a limited degree. It must be goodness, truth, nobility, right? In order to be that first efficient cause, so that we don't have to apply the principle of causality to it. 4, goodness, truth, and nobility are convertible with being. 5, so there must be an efficient cause of the being of all things that has being to an unlimited degree too. And of course, a thing that has unlimited being and causes all things, causes the being of all things, in other words, causes them all to exist, that would be God. Here's the interpretation from the Lectura. 1, everything that exists the way it does by participation is reduced to something that is that way essentially. And this is just what participation is, right? If you participate in a thing, you don't have that thing in and of yourself. You have it because you're participating. And if you're participating in what something else is participating in, then, it's that thing has got to participate, and you can't have an infinite number of participations without having something ultimately that's not participating, something that doesn't have that thing by participation. Now, 2, all things participate in goodness, truth, and nobility. So 3, all things are reduced to something that is goodness, truth, and nobility essentially, right? They must be reduced to something that is not participating, but just is those things. 4, goodness, truth, and nobility are convertible with being. 5, so all things are reduced to something that is being essentially, right? In other words, because we are participating in being, now because, we're participating in the transcendentals, therefore we are, there's something that is the maximum of those transcendentals. And the transcendentals are just being. So we are participating in being, and there must be something that's the maximum of those beings, and that of being itself, I should say. And that thing is God. So there you go. 2 different arguments that you can get out of argument 4, and you get to pick your favorite one. Next time we'll look at the final way Aquinas has for proving that God exists is true. And after that, we'll look at the objections. And I'll see you in those videos. Adios.